Welcome back everyone, this is the story so far. We began a new science mode save in Kerbal space program and promptly graduated from solid rocket nuggets to a full-fledged Minmus landing and return, which gave us the science points needed to unlock the parts to build an Apollo-style Mun rocket, which we built and went to the Mun with. Apollo-style. But now, Lowne Aerospace turns to greater ambitions. That's right, we're going interplanetary today, and the next logical step in conquering our solar system is Duna, analogue of Mars and its moon Ike. We'll need to build a rocket capable of flying 3 Kerbals to the Duna system, deploy a separate lander to land on both Duna and Ike, and then bring the crew, and more importantly, the precious science gathered, back to Kerbin. And that's exactly what I'm building in the vehicle assembly building in front of your very eyes. Well, so far I've just built the lander, which has enough fuel to land on the surface of Duna, return to orbit, and then land on the surface of Ike, making this not just our first interplanetary mission, but also the first mission that'll feature a landing on 2 different celestial bodies. I did use a bit of part clipping with the lower gold tanks. I did this purely to make the lander look better though. The tanks would work fine if they weren't clipped in and instead just protruded a bit further down at the bottom, but that just didn't look as good, you know? One of the bigger hurdles of designing this craft was the fact that we don't have the nuclear engine unlocked yet, meaning we'll have to use a much more inefficient chemical rocket engine. In this case, I went with the Cheetah for our interplanetary transfer and command vehicle. Like the Mun mission, I went for an Apollo-style setup, so we've got 3 Kerbals who will spend most of the mission in the command pod of the main ship, with 2 of them commanding the lander to conduct the 2 landings of the mission. But as you can see, the rocket's construction is basically done, so now we need to time warp to a Kerbin to Duna transfer window.
Should be 45 degrees.
And I've just been informed that the rocket is ready to launch. Easy to stay informed when it's my own space program, I guess. But when trying to stay informed on science or politics, there are so many narratives being spun by the media, it's hard to know if a news source is reliable. For example, the groundwater supplies are plunging across the Colorado Basin. What's up with that? The coverage is all over the political spectrum, from left to right to centre, and despite this range, there are only 16 news sources covering it. So what are the facts? Ground News is the answer. It gathers articles from a multitude of sources across the internet and gives you the information about each source's political leanings, reliability, and who owns them, so that you can quickly understand what's really going on. For that aforementioned Colorado River Basin story, Ground News shows us the 16 sources, breaking down their political leanings and giving us a biased distribution. This one seems was mostly only covered by the left, and so Ground News flagged this as a possible blind spot for the right, highlighted in their blind spot feed. This is a feature that lets you see stories that are disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum that you might have otherwise never come across. Cut through media sensationalism and bias, and avoid inflammatory algorithms to get to the bottom of what's really going on. Go to ground.news/MattLowne, linked below, or scan the QR code to get 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. Thank you so much to Ground News for sponsoring today's video. And Jebediah, Bill Kerman and Bob Kerman are all airborne together for the second time for this playthrough of Lowne Aerospace III, the third one, as we begin our ascent. Now, I don't think my gravity turn was quite as aggressive as it probably should have been. We're tipping over a little bit too slowly. I was trying to use the, if you look at the roll, yaw and pitch things on the bottom left of the screen, you can see the little slider gauges are blue. That's because I pressed caps lock, so I have fine control. So WASD have a lot less of an input, if that makes sense. It's designed for sort of fine aircraft control. But I like it because by default, the actual gimbal of the mainsail engines, which are powering the first 3 stages, or I guess, you know, the 2 side boosters are now detached. I don't really like how, like, the gimbal looks. Like, it's very snappy and video gamey. I know it's a video game, right? But I don't know. I think it just looks better having the fine control, so you can't visibly see the engine gimbaling as much. And when you do see it gimbal, it's kind of a smooth, realistic look. But I'm not really used to flying like that, and so the gravity turn wasn't the best. But regardless, we made it to space all okay. So not really much else to comment on there. We had cross-feed enabled on this thing, so basically the two side cores would feed into the central core, not draining any fuel from the central core, so that when the two side boosters detached, we still had a fully fueled rocket to continue the mission. Which has never really been done in real life. I know things like the Space Shuttle are a thing, but for things like Delta IV Heavy and Falcon Heavy and any other kind of triple-core rocket, that's never been done. It's been attempted. SpaceX set out to have the Falcon Heavy adopt a similar fuel, feeding system, but it was just too technologically difficult to do. So yeah, a little tidbit of the rocket's design there that I probably should have mentioned in the vehicle assembly building, although the build was over fairly quickly, wasn't it? I feel like it's a fairly simple craft altogether, right? I mean, the lander is kind of the most tricky thing to build. The rest is just basically one giant fuel tank. Had to have a triple core setup because, of course, we've only got 2.5 meter diameter parts at this stage. We haven't got the big heavy stuff that we'll get later on in the tech tree. So that's kind of one of the nice things about science mode. It kind of forces me to do things I might not necessarily otherwise do, like use a triple core setup instead of a big 5 meter Saturn V style rocket. And things like the Cheetah engine I hardly ever use because the nuclear engine is just better and the Wolfhound engine is better generally. But here I'm kind of having to have my hand forced a little bit, and it's making me having to come up with creative decisions. Gets the old brain cooking sometimes, maybe, I guess. So yeah, it's kind of a fun. I feel like as I was saying those words out loud, they sounded like negatives, right? Because no one wants to be forced to do anything right. Hill that I will always die on is I hate Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's weapon breaking system. It made the game completely unplayable to me. I never completed Breath of the Wild, and I didn't even play Tears of the Kingdom. My partner played Tears of the Kingdom, and I was watching her play it, and I was like, nah, I can't do this again. And yeah, the arguments in favor of that weapon breaking system was always, oh yeah, but it forces you to use different weapons and change up your style and things. And I'm like, I don't want to be forced to. I want to use the sword. I want to use the Master Sword. I am Zelda. But then I've just made the same argument for science mode in Kerbal Space Program. So make that make sense. I feel like it's slightly different, right? Because, a sword shouldn't break after being, hitting something 3 times. Whereas the engines all work in KSP. I don't know. I guess I just don't really like weapon breaking systems. Kind of was annoying in Animal Crossing as well. What am I even talking about? I'm not even talking about anything that's going on in this video. And we've now done the maneuver to Duna. I mean, this playthrough is not a tutorial playthrough, as I've said several times throughout the playthrough. So you get little tangents like that, I guess. It's just something to just be expected. There's a link in the description to Lowne Aerospace II, which was an actual tutorial series for beginners, or maybe not for super duper beginners. I didn't go into the absolute basics of gravity turns and stuff like that. I did try and do that for Lowne Aerospace III. So the original Lowne Aerospace III was in Kerbal Space Program 2. That relic of a game, and I put so much effort into that tutorial series. I put diagrams up explaining what gravity turns were and how to do them. I was so proud of that, and then obviously it was all for naught in the end. And the kind of beginner tutorial scene on YouTube for KSP1 is already so oversaturated, I didn't feel like there was any need for me to make my own absolute beginner's tutorial for KSP1. And that's the end of my story. I'm going to talk about what's happening on screen now. So we have new science experiments. Well, we have one new science experiment. We have the magnetometer boom. So I'm running that in interplanetary space, as well as all of our other science kit. I guess except the seismometer, because that only works when landed somewhere. Because this is the first time we've been into deep interplanetary space. We get a few little extra science points on the way to Duna. I did forget to run the magnetometer experiment whilst we were in space above Kerbin, so I'll have to do that on the way back from Duna, but obviously we're still on the way at this stage, so I'm just making our mid-course correction burns that are, so our current trajectory is taking us within Duna's sphere of influence. We kind of want to be, close up to Duna, right? So we're doing is that a normal burn or an anti-normal burn? The previous screen's too small for me to make out. Looks like a normal burn. I feel like I ought to just know at this stage. I've been doing this for this many years. I feel like the muscle memory, I should just know which direction the spaceship has to burn on a mid-course correction point to Duna, but I guess, what are you going to do, eh? So I decided that air braking is for noobs, of course, we all know this. So I'm going to be capturing it to Duna, doing a retrograde burn rather than using any of its atmosphere to slow ourselves down. If you're trying to recreate my kind of journey playing science mode and you're kind of struggling for fuel, then you could always aerobrake, although you got to be mindful that the solar panels I've got on board this thing are non-retractable. Well, I should say that the solar panels on the lander are retractable, but not the ones on the mothership, so you kind of... We can't aerobrake in this case, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So we've done our first initial capture, now we're plotting a maneuver node for our second burn that's going to circularize us in low Duna orbit. I wanted to get into an eccentric orbit first though, so we could run our science experiments in space high above Duna. So just like Kerbin, there are kind of two spaces above the planet. So there's space near to Duna and space high above Duna. So that's what I'm quickly doing here, doing crew report, EVA report, all of those science experiments, including the magnetometer boom. And here I am actually just deploying the little communitron. It turns out I still don't quite know how the antennas work in Kerbal Space Program. My thought was that the mothership has a really powerful antenna. It's got a relay antenna and just a communication antenna on board, so it can connect to the Kerbal Space Center. My hope was by having a small antenna on the lander. That antenna hasn't got the range to reach the KSC, but it will have the range to reach the mothership. So I was hoping it could kind of like ping to the mothership, and then the mothership could act as a relay to get to the KSC, but it didn't work. The reason for this is because the mothership has two antennas, right? It's got a communications antenna, which is really powerful, and a relay antenna, which is not very powerful. I don't think I've got a very powerful relay antenna unlocked currently in the tech tree at this stage in our playthrough. So my hope was maybe we could sort of cheese the game, and the game would just see, we can connect to the KSC with our communications antenna, and we have a positive check for do we have a relay on board, therefore we could just sort of connect to the mothership and then connect to the KSC. That was my thought anyway. It didn't work. So when we kind of detached the lander, we won't have a connection to the Kerbal Space Center. But I'm just going to go ahead and say that in my headcanon, we do. Because we have an aerial that should be able to connect to the mothership. And then, Bob, or Bill even, I should say, on board the mothership can then talk to us on the surface and talk to the KSC about our whereabouts and all that. So this kind of should work. It just doesn't. So I guess for kind of our future missions that we're doing to farther flung places, either I'll need to put a more powerful communications dish on the lander itself. That's if I do another kind of mission where I do a separate lander and a separate mothership, which I think I will, because there's just kind of more fun and interesting missions to do in my humble opinion. We'll either have to put a more powerful communications dish on the lander, or put a more powerful relay dish on the mothership. So that was a really long story, wasn't it? I hope that all made sense. I'm not going to pause and check. We're just going to carry on as we make our descent into Duna's atmosphere. So we've got Bob Kerbin and Jebediah coming on board. We have a lot of Delta V. We've got 2.5 kilometers per second, in fact, slightly more than that in total, which is way more than you need for Duna. For Duna, it's almost free to land because we can just use parachutes. The atmosphere on Duna is a lot more tenuous than Kerbin, though, so parachutes aren't going to be able to stop us completely. We'll have to do a small engine burn to come to a safe touchdown speed. And then, getting back to Duna orbit, it's, I guess it takes a fair amount of fuel, but not the amount of fuel we have on board. But as I said earlier in the build time-lapse, we are going to be doing a landing on Ike after this. So that's why we've got way more fuel than we need in the lander. And if you guys wanted to do this mission yourself, you could actually optimize things a bit more and refuel the lander at the mothership rather than just having all of its fuel on board, and do multiple landings on Duna so you can collect more science by visiting different biomes. I've set the arbitrary challenge for this playthrough of I can only do one landing per planet or moon, just so that we're having to vary up the destinations we're going to. So that's something you could do, or you could just forget about Ike and just do hops around Duna and maximize your science that way, I guess. Anyway, speaking of science, we've run all the experiments, so now Bob Kerbin is going to go out on EVA and collect the data. I did make a small mistake, though, so we're currently playing as Bob Kerbin, but now we switched to the lander so we can run all of the experiments, and then I tried to collect the data without switching back to Bob Kerbin. I was just blindly clicking without really reading what I was doing, and realized I just reset the Science Junior and Mystery Guru in the process of doing all of that. So then I switched to Bob and had to quickly run the experiments again from EVA. So in case you're wondering why I did that, I didn't mean to. It was just a mistake. Again, this is not a tutorial, so I am absolved from any sins. I think, if you could call that a sin, I'm not sure. Anyway, we've now kind of done the trivial thing of, doing science and research on the surface of Duna. Now it's time to do the most important thing, which is, of course, planting our flag. And I just mentioned the mistake I made earlier in that I kind of did all the science wrong. I also made a bit of a blunder. I forgot to bring an EVA science kit with us, so Bob Kerman can't hit his golf club. I was genuinely really annoyed, but I didn't have time to then revert to Spaceplane Hangar, or revert to vehicle assembly building, I should say, and equip Bob with a science pack. So that was a bit of a downer. I'm gonna have to put like a post-it note or something on my monitor saying, don't forget to bring an EVA science kit next mission, because I really like doing this EVA science kits, and they do give you a pretty generous amount of science, to be honest, for like how easy they are to incorporate into a lander. Like, unlike the physical science parts, you can just drop them into the cargo hold of the command pod, or just stick it to a Kerbal. Like, the Kerbals don't need to have their parachutes with them, unless you forget to add parachutes to your return vehicle, and then you need to EVA them out before you crash into the surface of Kerbin, but hopefully that won't happen to us. So yeah, they're dead easy to carry around. You get like loads of science. So I'm a bit disappointed that I forgot to bring that in this mission's case. Yes, we're going to speed the footage up a little bit now to get Bob Kerman back on board the lander. There we go. And oh yeah, I think I did like I did 2 crew reports by mistake. So yeah, that's why I had to dump that experiment. And then we can just time warp around to a point at which we can take off and rendezvous with Bill. Bill. I always get Bill and Bob mixed up. Bill Kerman in low Duna orbit. So we're going to retract our solar panels and retract the ladder as well. I don't think retracting the ladder makes a huge difference. I'm not sure if the ladders have like higher drag when they're deployed, but it would make sense, right? We also retract the landing gear as well, and then just press on to orbit. So yeah, like I say, Duna's atmosphere is very thin, so even something like the Terrier engine, which is optimized to work in a vacuum, no problems lifting up this relatively heavy lander from the surface of the red planet. As we get a lovely little view of it. And the nice thing about these kind of single stage vehicles for atmospheric flight is you can kind of see how the engine plume changes as we ascend. So it starts out very narrow and tight as we're kind of close to sea level, and as we get towards the thinnest parts of the atmosphere, it'll spread out, be a bit more ballooned out because of the lower pressures. Although I did just say that Juno has a very thin atmosphere, so I'm not sure how visually clear that will be in this particular instance. But yeah, actually looking at it, our altitude is quite high, and it's the plume doesn't really look any different, does it? But maybe that's something you could just look forward to next time you watch me ascend from Kerbin. Pay attention to the little plume of the engine bell, and then the plume of the engine exhaust. You can see it expands as we ascend through the atmosphere because there's less atmospheric pressure and all that. And that's why real life engines, the sea level engines, they have smaller engine bells than the upper stage vacuum optimized engines. Classic example would be the SpaceX Raptor versus the SpaceX Vacuum Raptor. Huge engine bell on the Vacuum Raptor, even though it's like the same engine. Basically, very, very brief, unscientific summary of why that is. You kind of want the air pressure inside the engine bell to be the same, or as close as possible to the pressure outside of the engine bell. So at sea level, obviously, pressure is quite high. So you have a small engine bell to keep the pressure inside the engine bell at a high level. And then obviously in the vacuum space, the pressure is, well, it's 0. So you kind of want the pressure inside the engine bell to be as low as possible. So you have a nice big engine bell so that, the pressure is low. And there you go. That's a bit of science for you there. So as you can see, we're more or less in a circular Duna orbit at this stage. The atmospheric border on Duna is 50 kilometers. So our apoapsis is at 55. Our periapsis, well, it was in the 40s when I started this sentence, but now it too is above the 50 kilometer mark, keeping our orbit fairly low at this stage because our target vessel is ahead of us. So we're trying to stay in a lower orbit than the target because lower orbits are faster than higher orbits. So by keeping our orbit nice and low, we could catch up. There it is, about 7 kilometers away, but then doing a lazy old burn towards target. This is really inefficient, but I knew I had enough fuel to just do this lazy way of getting to the target. Just burn towards it, then kill all of our speed, burning retrograde relative to the target, then burning towards it again. We can sort of like lazily get back to the mothership. So there it is, coming into view. Bill Kerman is finally united once again with his fellow space frogs. In the last mission to the Mun, he was the loneliest Kerbal in the world, in the solar system really, because he was on the far side of the Mun. No communication to the KSC, no communication to the lander either. He was truly all on his own. And that's even more so this time. He was in a completely different planetary system with no communication with the outside world. But he's about to make some friends. Well, make some friends, be reunited with his friends once again, or colleagues. I don't really know what the personal workplace relationships are like in Kerbin land, but they're all smiling, so I guess they're all happy to be there. Although Jebediah, Kerbin, and Bob Kerbin aren't rushing on board, right? They're just staying on board the lander. So I'm not like transferring them between the vehicles because like in my head, in real life, they would just be like floating freely between the two vehicles. A bit like, you ever see the film Apollo 13 when you're watching Tom Hanks floating freely around between the lunar lander and the Apollo command module? It's like that here, right? We've got the Apollo style command module and the lander can. They can move between it. It's like a bit more habitable space for the long old journey to Duna. 332 days so far this mission's been going on. So it's a long old time to be sitting in that cramped little, command pod. And I guess it's kind of cruel, right? Because the lander can habitable space is also quite small. So yeah, the Kerbals, I guess they're just made of stronger stuff than you and I suppose. I could certainly never endure that amount of time in that smaller space. But Kerbals, as we know, they love space and can stay in space even when there is not much space in their spaceships. So there we are. So through that terrible story, we've now plotted a maneuver that's going to take us to Ike, and we're going to circularize and go and do a landing on Ike. Won't that be lots of fun? So obviously Ike is its own thing, right? So we can get science from space high above Ike and space from near to Ike, just like we did for Duna, Kerbin, Mun, and Minmus so far in this playthrough. And so yeah, you don't get that much science from space. You get most science from landing somewhere, but every little helps. We're trying to unlock the tech tree here. So yeah, that's that. Yeah, it's kind of another reason I'm annoyed that I forgot to bring any EVA science kits, because of course in this mission we're doing 2 landings, and so we could have done 2 EVA experiments, with the Kerbals. We could have got loads more science. So yeah, it's kind of disappointing, because I really do like the EVA science kits. I believe they were added with the Breaking Ground DLC release. I could be wrong, but I'm 99% sure that's when they were added. So yeah, and there is Ike appearing below us. Now you can't really see it yet, but there are some very interesting geological features on the surface of Ike, and that is because I am not playing fully stock KSP, as you've probably been able to deduce during this very long video. Just running visual mods, no parts mods, just visual mods. And one of those visual mods is Parallax Continued, and that's why the surface of Ike, and indeed Duna, Mun, Minmus, and Kerbin, and all the other places we're going to be going, they look so much better than in stock KSP. And in the case of Ike, Parallax Continued not only beautifies the kind of surface and appearance of Ike, it also adds some really, really interesting geological features. They're like big red geodes or mineral formations or stalagmites. I'm not really sure. I'm no geologist or rocket scientist, so I don't actually know what it is, if it's based on a real phenomenon that happens either on Earth or in the solar system / universe that we live in, or if it's just kind of a creative thing that the mod maker made and it's not based on anything scientific. Either way, I'm sure someone in the comments can let me know. But either way, you're about to see these things appear. There they are. There's kind of red shards sticking out of the surface of Ike. Looks very striking. I wonder if Lynx, who obviously made Parallax Continued, went with red because this is the moon of the red planet, or if this is based on an actual chemical thing and it's red. I don't know. Like I say, this isn't a tutorial, nor is it a scientific educational video, I guess. But as you can see, touchdown is coming along very, very nicely. Now, the stay on the surface of Ike is going to be very brief, and that's just because I had to do this twice. The first time I did it, I kind of got the Kerbals out on EVA, planted the flag, did all the science, did everything, and had a fun old time. And then I got into the lander, and then the lander just fell through the ground and exploded. And I hadn't made a quick save, so then I had to do the whole thing again, which is what you're watching now. But I was kind of pressed for time, and I didn't want to risk the explosion happening again, so I made a quick save on landing. And I just basically got Bob Kerbin out on EVA, did the science experiments, gathered the surface sample, etc., and planted the flag, and then just got straight back on the lander. Jebediah Kerbin just held the fort. He didn't get out on EVA as well. So that's why I feel like I regret it in hindsight, because it is nice having both Kerbals out on EVA for the photo opportunity, and for me, as a creator, a thumbnail shot opportunity. Although I guess kind of the, this is a Duna mission, right? So I'll use the Duna landing for the thumbnail. But it's I guess it's nice to have options and for you guys to see the Kerbals out on EVA looking all happy. But look at all that science! appearing on the top left of the screen, all of the data that we've gathered. We've actually done basically the lion's share of the science gathering at this point in the mission. The only thing left to do is run the magnetometer experiment in Kerbin's sphere of influence, so in space high above Kerbin and space low to Kerbin, and I believe that's then it for science gathering for this mission. So actually, now that we're going back to the mothership is the vehicle that has the magnetometer boom on it, not the lander. So we don't actually need to have the lander going forward. We can just ditch it or leave it in Ike orbit, or deorbit it first so it crashes into the surface of Ike and doesn't leave any clutter in space. But I thought I'd bring it back to Kerbin with us just because we have the Delta V in the mothership required. And again, it's nice to have that kind of extra habitable space for our astronauts. Just makes things a bit more realistic and believable, even though it is still a very, very unethically small space to live in for the duration of the mission. So yeah, but here we are. You see, rendezvous was fairly trivial. It's much easier to get a rendezvous very quickly on planets and moons without an atmosphere, because you can just do the gravity turn much quicker and it's much more predictable, at least for me. So your mileage might vary. But there we are. We have a rendezvous. So now we're just going to do the quick Lowne lazy method of docking. So switch to both vessels, set each other as the targets, and then use auto SAS to hold the targets. And as you can see, they just align themselves beautifully. And I can just use RCS to make sure the docking ports are aligned. You can tell they're aligned because the prograde vector on the nav ball is superimposed over the target vector. It wasn't quite at the end there, so I made a minor adjustment just before impact or docking. So yeah, that was the docking sequence done. Now, for realism's sake, I'm not going to pump any fuel from the lander into the mothership because there's no obvious way in which that could logistically happen. I guess there could be like a micro fuel line that moves it very slowly. Again, it's going to be a long old way back to Kerbin, so we don't need the fuel very quickly, but I don't know, it just felt like from a realism standpoint it would be better to like just leave the fuel on the lander. And then we time warped around, so Ike is on the opposite side of Duna, so that when we do an escape burn, our periapsis around the sun will be below Duna's orbit, because of course we're going back to Kerbin, right, which is in a lower orbit around the sun compared to Duna. As you can see, we are not at a Kerbin to Duna. Oh, sorry, I misspoke. We're not at a Duna to Kerbin transfer window, but I don't care. I'm just going to create a burn that gets us on an intersect with Kerbin's orbit, and then we'll do a burn just just after our sun periapsis, and we can force those grey encounter nodes to swing together. But here you go. I think I'm making a move node just to test if this is going to happen, and as you can see, yeah, a small prograde burn is going to get us on a course that intersects Kerbin's sphere of influence, and we can get home nice and safely, and it's all within budget. You know, we've got over 1 kilometer per second of Delta V remaining in the vehicle, and you know, even if that wasn't enough, we could just ditch the lander and save some weight, and therefore gain some extra Delta V if we needed it, but we didn't, so it was all fine in the end. So yeah, now we're just going to go ahead and time warp round to that maneuver node that I just plotted, and as you'll see, it wasn't the most accurate because we're not actually going to get a Kerbin encounter when we do this burn. You'll see what I mean in just a second when the burn's done. So yeah, we'll close the maneuver node off just for the final stage of the burn, just so I can eyeball it myself. As you see, those grey nodes get really, really close, and then no encounter. But as you can see, if you really squint, you can see our periapsis is actually higher than Kerbin's orbital height, so I figured, well, we'll just time warp to apoapsis and do a small retrograde burn to lower our periapsis, and Robert, your father's brother, we have an encounter with Kerbin. Not a great encounter, but an encounter nonetheless. As you see, we're going to have to do a small inclination change so that we're actually intersecting Kerbin's atmosphere. And that's what we need to do. We just need to hit its atmosphere because, of course, we're not going to be needing to do circularization or anything like that because we just want to be landing. So we can use our ablative heat shield to do all the deceleration and, you know, slow ourselves down sufficiently, and then use parachutes to perform our final touchdown. I mean, you guys have seen missions done by me at this point, so you kind of know how this works. I'm just kind of talk about things whilst not a lot's happening on screen, or at least not a lot's happening on screen that I haven't already talked about prior to me executing it. And there we are. The burn is done. That periapsis is very low, though, or very high, I should say. So I'm going to just play around with RCS. So we enable RCS by pressing R on the keyboard, and then use I, J, K, and L, and H and N, similarly to WASD and Shift and Control for normal engine controls. And we can just kind of force the periapsis to be a good height. So I can't remember what it was. I think it was like 22 kilometers, I think. Fairly safe height because the heat shields in this game are extremely overpowered, especially the ablative ones. The inflatable heat shield is a bit more vulnerable to extreme heating, but it's still very, very good for what it is. And the ablative heat shields, they may as well not even be ablative, right? They're so crazy powerful. I don't think I've ever actually fully burned through an ablative heat shield. Probably there's been like a fringe case where I came in at a super duper eccentric trajectory compared to where I was re-entering Kerbin, I'm assuming, but I don't recall that ever happening. So yeah, there you go. You can see I'm just running the magnetometer experiment. Also, very important to remember to take the data from the lander and store it on the command pod, because unlike in KSP2, the game KSP1 doesn't do that by default. So if we just detached the lander and obviously detached the command pod from the lower ship, we would get none of the science that we've worked so hard to get, because it's all stored on board the lander. That's why when I transferred Jebediah and Bob back onto the mothership, I had to have one of them do an EVA rather than just a direct transfer through the docking ports, because we need to go on EVA so that we could take the data from the lander can. And here we are, re-entering at very high speed, so we'll be fine because we've got the ablative heat shield, but the same cannot be said for our poor little lander and the remains of the mothership, which are exploding in a catastrophic manner as we re-enter Kerbin's atmosphere. And yeah, with that beautiful mod. The mod that's creating those re-entry effects is called Firefly, by the way. Cannot recommend it enough. Full visual mod list is in the description of the video as well if you want to check that out. Ooh, another little visual mod just reared its head just there. We had a little lightning flash. That's for BlackRack's Volumetric Clouds mod. And there we are. We have our parachutes have deployed, coming down a little bit fast but survivable. We can slow our speed down a little bit by detaching our heat shield, and I always like the fact that the heat shields explode, even though that it's just a big chunk of ablative material, right? There's no combustibles on board. And there we are, touchdown in the highlands of Kerbin. I guess we could go on EVA and take a surface sample and do all that, but such a negligible amount of science, because now we're earning the big points. As you can see in the R&D building, we have 5,294 science points to play with. So I kind of just started blindly unlocking stuff, to be honest. So advanced fuel system is good because we have the big orange tank. I figured the nuclear engine will be a very good engine to go for, because we're going to be going further than Duna for our next flight, and so it'd be nice to have the efficient engine. Then we unlocked some of the aviation stuff, just because I like those parts. And really, these nodes are all really cheap. 160 science points. Very, very low now compared to the amount of science that we have to work with. So this kind of middle point of the tech tree, we can just unlock everything at this stage. It doesn't really matter which ones we go for, because now we're just working towards the really expensive stuff. So I was kind of thinking about which expensive stuff to go for. Do we go for kind of the advanced science tech to get the advanced science experiments to get us more science points? Or do we go for kind of high power electrics, because that is going to be very helpful when we go very, very far afield. Once you're talking about things like Joule missions and ELU missions, solar panels are rubbish. And so it's nice to have RTGs. Although that being said, the nuclear engines have alternators on board, so we would still have means of generating power if we didn't have RTGs available to us. So yeah, that was just some food for thought. I did think very heavy rocketry would be worth the spend, because then we get the Mammoth engine and the Rhino engine and the Vector. I forgot how far down the Vector engine is actually on the tech tree. I mean, it is objectively one of the best engines in the game, so I understand why it's so far down, but yeah, I just forgot. So as you can see, we've spent quite a lot of our science so far. I'm also getting kind of bored watching me play through the game at real-time speed, so I'm going to speed it all up now so you can just see how I spent the remainder of our science points. So yeah, I spent a long time clicking various nodes, pondering what I wanted, seeing what was available, and in the end, I just unlocked all this stuff. I decided to go for the experimental electrics tab, so very, very expensive, but we get the RTG, so that's going to be helpful, because for our next mission, we're going to be going very, very, very far away. So, I hope you're looking forward to it. Big thank you now to the names on the right-hand side of the screen, my amazing Patreon and YouTube channel members who support me directly, making all of this content possible, as well as, of course, our amazing sponsors, Ground users, once again, supported by channel, so huge thank you. Sign up below. It is a great site that I do genuinely use. And yeah, that is the end of today's installment of Lowne Aerospace 3, the third one. I very much hope you enjoyed the journey, and I will see you in the next one.